Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 190, just 10 episodes short of the dos centennials, the two centennials for September the 9th, 2020. My name is Wes Fryer, coming to you from Oklahoma City, where we do not have fires raging or, floods or all kinds of crazy things happening, but we have had a lovely drop in the weather, and I think it's getting into the 50s, but I understand, it may be less than freezing sometime in the near future, where my compadre in podcast talk is hailing from. So Dr. Jason Neiffer, ladies and gentlemen, hailing from Missoula, Montana, where the view is almost that good right outside his window, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's a little hazy out there. We're getting some smoke from the West Coast fires, and my understanding is that those fires are pretty hardcore. I have family in Oregon that sent pictures last night of blood red skies, which it's pretty intense. But luckily, the fires have died down just ever a little bit in Montana. We had a huge fire in Bozeman, Montana over the weekend, but that's died down because of some rain. But otherwise, the weather here has been actually very nice and cool, so hopefully it stays that way. But I don't just sit around and talk about the weather all day. I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the fabulous University of Montana campus here in Missoula, Montana. But this hour is not about you, and it's not about me. It is about EdTech news. And we have quite a few articles to talk about tonight. But Wes, what is the EdTech situation really all about?
Well, Jason, I'm so glad you asked. We are a weekly podcast on Wednesday evenings that attempts to recap some of the technology news of the past week or so and pass that through an educational lens. We also will be prone to rant and talk about things that we are passionate about from time to time. So we'll prepare you for that, but we will attempt to share links as we go along into our live stream, which is going to both Facebook and to YouTube. The chat is open, so if you happen to be here live, we would love to hear from you and find out where you're from. Sometimes we have folks from not only Arizona, but Honduras and, Ohio and other places. You can check out all the links that we have for our show on edtechsr.com/links. And we almost always fail to cover all of those links, so you can check those out. We will obviously have some Geeks of the Week. Last week, I think people were amazed and loved. Jason, I think, had 3 Geeks of the Week, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago. But anyway,
it was last week. It feels like several weeks ago, but yes, it was indeed last week.
That's right. So where would you like to go first tonight, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, let's go ahead and do the Apple news. There's one article I absolutely want to get to tonight that I think might spark an interesting discussion, but there is a lot of interesting ongoing Apple news. I want to start with an article. So I have to say, I'm still part of the Apple faithful a little bit in that I like watching it, and I kind of like the theatrics of being an Apple consumer, right? But it was really funny because apparently there was supposed to be a new watches introduced yesterday, and the super Apple fans were waiting with bated breath that the new watches were coming, and instead Apple said, no, we're going to have an event next week. So on September 15th, there's going to be an Apple event, and just watching the hand-wringing from the Apple media talk about this, I've read that it's either going to be just watches, or it's going to be watches and iPads, or it's going to be watches and iPads in the new iPhone. And then will it be the iPhone, will it be the iPad crowd is debating, because there's likely a new chip coming out, the A15, I think it is. Maybe it's the A16. A15, I think it is, that has that should be, beautiful, fast new chip. Apple bringing that same technology later this year to probably an iMac and a lightweight MacBook, which is super exciting. But that's certainly coming in the relatively near future. But there will be this event next week, and I got to say, because I feel duly obligated to mention this every time we talk about the Apple Watch. Really, if anything was going to be bring me back to the Apple architecture, it's the watch, because they're doing so many cool and innovative things on that. And I'll mention something that I'm sure I've said at least 3 or 4 times before on our broadcast. I don't know a single person that started with Wear OS. That's the Android operating system for wearables that is still wearing that, except for me. I still wear a daily Wear OS device, whereas almost every single person that I know that jumped onto Apple Watches is still wearing their Apple Watch on a regular basis, and that's something, right? That is an extraordinary thing, I think, that Apple can rely upon. So, Wes, I know that you do like to buy either the latest and greatest Apple stuff, or you are also masterful at finding good bargains on 1 or 2 generation old Apple stuff. But is there anything that Apple could announce next week that would, tempt your pocketbook a bit?
No, I don't think so. I'm very happy with where we're at. Lately we have been, the used Apple family. So
Yeah.
I'm sporting the Generation 3 watch, which I was able to pick up for about, well, it was a little over $200. But with Generation 6 coming out, I mean, this Gen 3 is a fantastic watch. So, the good news is that watch is going to be even cheaper on Swappa. You've been able to get that until, I don't know, maybe sometime in probably the last 3 months or something. I think in June we actually bought one new at the Apple Store for our daughter, and it was selling at that time from Apple at the same price it had been selling for Swappa. So I'm glad to see, of course, the march of technology, moving forward. But I am very pleased with where I'm at with my technology at school. Very thankful to be able to have a great iPad, have a great MacBook Pro. I think that the continued advance of Apple's chip technology and the integration into their systems is going to be good for the long term, and it's going to be exciting to see. And we're probably going to be, seeing more of a merger of devices in terms of function and touch and things like that. But yeah, not going to be swayed at this point. But sounds like you might be on the edge, Jason. And if you are stunned on the 15th, we'll just we could even have a special show if we needed to. If you feel so moved, But,
yeah, we'll see. The health features on the Apple Watch are just unparalleled and exist nowhere in the ecosystem of Android Wear. And they haven't even been really releasing updated chips in that arena, too. There are ones that are available, but they don't make it in new watches. And I have to say, my favorite Android Wear watch right now this was one of the original versions released in 2014, and I love it. It's still got a day's worth of battery, and I like the square form factor. This was made fun of when it was first released by, I think this is an Asus watch, and yet I like that form factor quite a bit. So yeah, we'll see. But with the amount of health stuff available there, I am extremely health conscious. I use a lot of tech to help monitor my health and my specific, along with overall health, and that's tempting. So now that said, speaking of the Apple Watch, you have an article about something new on the Apple Watch.
I do. This is from 9 to 5 Google, which they also have, of course, 9 to 5 Mac. But 9 to 5 Google reports that Google Maps is returning to the Apple Watch. And while that certainly is probably just more from a consumer interest standpoint, yay, that's exciting. It's also, I would think, a good sign of some cooperation between Apple and Google. If you're familiar, there's been these wars where, for a while, I don't know, it's been difficult to, be a full Google user on iOS devices. And so with some of the changes they've made to the operating system, you can now, I'm pretty sure, make your Gmail app your default mail app instead of having to default to Apple's. And, Apple was really wanted everybody to switch over to their maps. We had some bad experiences years ago and just completely abandoned it. I deleted it off of my phone, and I never want to use Apple Maps again. So I'm glad to see that. The other thing, in addition to the watch integration that we continue to enjoy a lot, I don't have an article about this, but it's related to Google Maps, is the CarPlay. And so if you have a CarPlay compatible system, it is really wonderful because it really acts as a display for your phone. And so if you are plugging a newer phone in, you have newer CarPlay, or you've updated your operating system. But I've also been pleased to I kind of accidentally learned that you can use Siri to get directions in Apple Maps in Google Maps when you're in your car on CarPlay. Also, I'm now a big Spotify fan, so I can play music and have it play from Spotify, using Siri. So I think it's good to see this kind of interoperability. I don't think it's beneficial for us as consumers, whether we look at ourselves from the educational hat or just, citizens using our devices, to have Apple and Google not cooperating. So I think that is a positive thing, and maybe we'll see some more announcements along those lines. Who knows, for the Apple announcements. One other Apple article I have, this is really an excellent one. This is Ars Technica from, I think yesterday on the 8th of September. Apple says Epic's Fortnite payment scheme is theft, period. We talked about this on the show last week. Epic, who is the creator of Fortnite, which along with Roblox are absolutely the most popular games that my 5th and 6th graders play. I hear about Roblox and or Fortnite pretty much every single day as kids are talking about things. This is what this article does is it quotes the actual litigation and what the filings have said. And so some of the quotations in here, Apple says, the App Store is not a public utility. Epic has no right to, quote, reap all the benefits Apple and the App Store provide without having to pay a penny. They reveal that in the last 11 years, since 2008, Epic has earned over $600 million from App Store sales in that period. The fact that Epic no longer accepts that deal does not provide cover for Epic to breach binding contracts, dupe a longtime business partner, pocket commissions that rightfully belong to Apple, and then ask this court to take a judicial sledgehammer to one of the 21st century's most innovative business platforms simply because it does not maximize Epic's revenues. The other thing they go on to say is that on the Android store, the ecosystem failed to keep malware out. And so they cite Epic's failure. It says, when Epic started distributing Android version of Fortnite independently in 2018, Apple writes that immediately sites appeared that not only advertised Android Fortnite, but also distributed malware in the game. Apple also cites security vulnerabilities in that independently distributed Android version as evidence that its iOS protections are necessary. So this article kind of gets to the heart of a big Android versus Apple ecosystem and the argument of whether it should be more open and free or whether, consumers, schools, folks benefit from that. So Jason, any thoughts on that in terms of comparing the app ecosystems and benefits or drawbacks to either one?
Sure. Well, I mean, as I mentioned last week when we started, maybe it's 2 weeks ago when we started on this topic, is that I have a hard time figuring out which to cheer for here, because I think this both have really good points, right? Like Apple has a good point that, and in the way they argued that there, I think they argued that brilliantly, that the bottom line is that, we tightly control our ecosystem. There needs to be a price for that. And that if you want access to our customers, you should pay something for that. But at the same time, at 30%, it seems awfully stiff for what you're getting out of it as an app developer, right? And that reserves, in my mind, then reserves app development really then to large companies that can afford to invest in mega games for the output of getting that 70% back. It is interesting that Apple did take a swipe at the Android ecosystem because it is a lot more chaotic on Android. There's a much bigger problem on Android than there is on iOS of copycat apps. People that take the source code of commercial apps, change one or two things about it, strip out any sort of digital rights management, and then resell that app or give it away with heavy advertising. And I've noticed that probably 100 individual times since I moved to the Android ecosystem. I guess I did that in 2013. So it's hard to know who to fight for here, but at the same time, I mean, I think Apple has a good argument that we've built this extraordinary platform for developers to meet arguably higher end customers than the larger technological ecosphere. And, there should be a price for that. And, if you want to be a mobile gaming giant, then you might have to pay the piper a little bit here.
And I'm no legal expert, but my reading of this is that what Epic is really putting their chips on is really the tech correction. The idea that government, the courts are going to step in to try and curb monopoly power that arguably Apple has inside their ecosystem, and we're seeing the threat of regulation and intervention on multiple fronts when it comes to tech companies. So it's going to be interesting to see, but yeah, given I think the very persuasive way, that's why I like that article so well, or that's why I liked it so much. The language that they used in the filing, was very strong and seemed very persuasive. So it would be a major reversal of fortunes for Apple if they would lose this. It would seem like they're going to stand on solid ground, but. Will the court respond? I don't know. It would seem more likely, even though it's really hard to get Congress to act, that Congress, might be more likely to move in the political wind rather than the courts. So interesting to see this. And this is also something that's impacted my kids, right? So the Fortnite players that I have, my fifth graders were telling me, if you have a Mac, you can't get this update, you can't get this latest version. And it was like they were up on that. They knew what was going on with this fight. So it's interesting. There's some intersections and with politics and legal there, the threats about TikTok and whether or not the U.S. government. In fact, that deadline's coming up on the 15th. I don't know if I have if we've got any articles about that today, but yeah, will TikTok be banned in the United States? We do have some China articles that we can get to a little bit later. So interesting times.
Okay, let's go ahead and do the Android Google stuff, and then I'm going to ask if we can move towards a Firefox article from a couple weeks ago. So first and foremost, hallelujah, Android 11 is released. The latest Android operating system is out. It did appear in more than just Pixel phones this time. There was a handful of other third-party manufacturer phones that also end up with Android 11. And so I would refer folks to, there's a really great article on The Verge that goes through kind of the major updates. I do own a Pixel 3a. It's not my daily driver right now. It kind of rotates as my backup phone with a Moto G Power phone that has got a big old battery pack on it, which is why I love it. I did run betas of Android 11 earlier this summer, and I liked it. It was a nice, solid platform. But one of the reasons why I like Android 11, if you happen to be someone that either gets this or can get it relatively soon, is that it did integrate a lot of cool smart home stuff into it. And so as an example of this, when you press and held down on the power button, that would bring up the power button interface asking you if you want to shut off or reset your phone. It also brought up a panel on the bottom of the phone that allowed you to turn on and off and control smart home devices. And I thought that was a very clever and smart way to integrate that into the Android ecosystem. But Android 11 is here. And for the Android faithful that is using a Pixel device, and I think there's a Samsung device or two, and some other major manufacturers, they are also releasing Android 11 today. And then, Wes, you had an article about something that I know impacts us both.
Yeah, this is an article about Google Wi-Fi. So Jason and I are both users of what is now called Nest Wi-Fi, the Google Wi-Fi home system. And the article from Chrome Unboxed says that basically they're transitioning away from a separate app and it's being integrated into the home app. This is from Chrome Unboxed on September 7th. So I actually did that this morning, opened up the Google Home app, and then there's a little tab at the top, and it had the option to import your settings. I guess there may be some advanced things that you can't do, and you can still run the Google Wi-Fi app. But, what's remarkable about this, for me, it really shows the integration or the all-in we have for Google in terms of smart speakers, in terms of compatible devices, because we've got a number of smart plugs and switches, and so it has the same function, but continue to use the prioritization. So giving my wife last night on a Zoom call, she had priority, doing that now. Love that integration. So just kind of cool to see those things coming together. And I think I don't know if I'll get to write the blog post tonight, but man, this got me looking at some more things in terms of function, because you organize your house with room names and you can put these different devices in there. And you can have fun with if this, then that, depending on how you have that integrated when you want, lights to come on at sunrise or sunset and things like that. And man, I got into some of the Google Photos stuff, and this is beyond the article, but we now have an album of almost 3,500 pictures going back to like 2007 of our family, and the facial recognition is just scarily good. And anyway, these are all examples of where I really am happy being a part of the Google ecosystem. I don't have a desire to pay the top dollar for Apple's smart speaker, and I know you, Jason, continue to have Alexa, and I shouldn't have said her name, Madame A's, in your house as well. But are you any more in the Google camp for home automation and that kind of thing than the Amazon camp, or are you still firmly have both, feet in both camps?
Yeah, it's 50-50 for me. And in fact, I have both a Madame A device and a Google device sitting on my desk right now in my evolving home office. And part of it's because I think twice in the last 6 months, someone sent me a free Google Home of the little mini speaker. And, I didn't really need it in most cases. So I was able to put it on a desk, and I like them both. I mean, it's interesting, Wes, hearing you talking about kind of digging deep into the architectures and doing some cool nerdy stuff with it. I've done a little bit of that. Like I have some lights and stuff hooked up that I like a lot, but it's not really where I'm at yet with that. And, to be honest, if you're just dabbling it now and I'm kind of like, yeah, that's interesting, but I just, I'm not sure if the smart home captured the imagination in the way that manufacturers hoped it would. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have really interesting things set up in my home and my office. I can turn all my lights on and off in my office with that. I have smart light bulbs. I have most of the equipment in my office, except for the actual desktop PCs, on a timer now and turns off at 10 o'clock at night for power savings purposes. So that is an interesting thing for me. But the bottom line is that, that's about my extent in it. That said, I think it's great that Google's trying to find like a home at home for all your home stuff. And I think that's a good movement for our good friends at Google.
Peggy in the chat room is commenting that she does not have a smart home, so she's maybe doesn't have a use for that. Hey, all you need to do is order a plug, so you don't have to buy a new house, move into a house that is a quote unquote smart home. I think I actually started with our Christmas tree one year, because we have the old school timers that, have these dials and stuff like that. You go out of town, you want lights on, at night and shutting off. But it's, kind of cool to be able to have things, function in another way. So we had that on a timer, and, here in my office, I've got a long, fluorescent light that gives a little bit better lighting for video conferencing. And I when we were doing remote learning, I had that coming on and off on a regular basis, just so it was on when I came to sit down in the morning. But I just, control that with my voice. So yeah, I think it is still a gee whiz sort of thing, and everybody's not doing it, but it's totally this thing where the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed, because it's like living in Harry Potter land, right? I feel like I am casting spells. My wife the other day, because you name your things however you want. I made a new speaker group because I moved one of my speakers, and you can play podcasts, or you can play music and have it simultaneously playing on these different speakers, but you have to get your words just right. So we have lots of Lord of the Rings names for speaker groups and different things that we have in our house. And then you just if you don't say that name correctly, then it's not going to play. But yeah, it's definitely not a mainstream thing. And if you've seen Mr. Robot, you think about the fact that homes can be hacked, and those are those kinds of events are not mainstream either. But the more we depend upon the the cloud, and we had some internet outages, actually a whole series of them a few weeks ago, and boy, that is a real bummer, especially if you're going to do things like locks on doors and things like that. So you've got backups that you can go to, but you realize your dependency to those kinds of things when you're like, wow, what are we going to watch tonight? The internet's down, and we cut the cable like 8 years ago. So
okay, great. So Wes, I've been looking forward to talking about this to you for 2 weeks, but I want to give us enough time to do it. But there's been a lot of interesting Firefox news in the last month, and the news is interesting, but I guess I have a broader question I want to ask. So this is from ZDNet on August 14th. Talks about Firefox being at risk long-term financially, and they recently did ink a deal with Google to keep Google as the main search engine, and media reports vary on this. Some of them say it could net $500 million a year. Other people say that's up to $500 million a year, but the market share of Mozilla Firefox keeps decreasing ever so subtly month over month, year over year. And I do think it's interesting that if Firefox is a danger with $500 million a year, I do wonder what they're spending their money on, right? So that's certainly part of it. But I guess the question I would ask here, well, first, Wes, do you use Firefox in any sort of regularity at all?
No, I have it on my devices. Every once in a while, I will be using a different browser on my phone as well as on my computer, but it's very rare. Very rare. I am pretty much living in Chrome all the time. It's nice to have an option because sometimes you can have glitchy things happen, and a lot of times that's extension related, and you need to, power wash your Chrome browser and disable your extensions. You're usually good. We still, when I was IT director, were pushing out Firefox. We have a number of Firefox users because folks, you get baby duck syndrome and you get imprinted with whatever that technology is, and that's what you want to stick with. So people have their bookmarks and those kinds of things, over in Firefox. So we would continue to support both. I am a big advocate for open source for sure, and hopefully want to be remaining aware of dangers of corporatization and things like that when it comes to browsers and to software. But I am not a regular Firefox user. I'm interested to see the competition. I think that's probably been what's so positive, as far as speed, because for a while, Chrome was just rocket fast compared to everything else. And then, Firefox and renewed and Safari. So it's this, race between these browsers. And I don't know how many people are continually testing that to see,
Right.
if they need to be switching. But you're a pretty committed Firefox user, or have been.
In the past, right? And I've really been pretty much 100% on Chrome since it was released in, 2008 when Chrome first came out. And I think I had the beta installed for a while before it was even a thing, when it was called something else in its beta mode. But the bottom line is that I guess the question I feel like I need to ask is that, do we need to have multiple browser universes anymore, right? And if you think about it, so many things have moved to the Chrome architecture. Obviously, Chrome itself is based on the Chromium architecture, the open source project behind Google Chrome. Microsoft Edge is now built on top of Chromium. Opera, which for the long time was kind of I don't even know how to say this. It wasn't like the nerds web browser, because it really wasn't. It was for some folks, but it's kind of like a lot of people that were like, I want this other one because I don't want to be. I was a Chrome or an Opera user for a while, I must say, and I think it was both Firefox and then ultimately Chrome that pulled me away from Opera. But are we in a world anymore that needs multiple web architectures, right? Because if we can center all on one, I think there's an argument to be made that would make web development easier, because if there is a browser, right? And yes, it's an open source project owned by Google, but still, if there's a browser that is underneath all browsers, one could theoretically argue that it makes web development a lot easier, because you could just develop towards the engine that backs Chrome, the engine that backs Edge, the engine that backs Opera. So, Wes, I know you have a couple good arguments for this, but your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, the web needs to remain open, and even though I do love Google a lot, and think that generally, even though they took do no evil or whatever out of their official slogan, I mean, I've been very happy as a Google user, and drank the Google Kool-Aid, and I'm just a big fan. But they are a company, and they are a for-profit company, And the web should not be controlled by a single company. So whether that would be Microsoft back in the day when, things were a lot different, whether we talk about Amazon and their dominance. I mean, we have a long tradition in the United States of America of antitrust legislation and consumer protection laws, and being wary of monopoly power. And so I hope that Firefox is going to stay alive. I hope that the competing WebKit, right, that Safari is based on, is going to continue to thrive. I think it's competition is very beneficial. We've talked about it just personally about T-Mobile versus Verizon versus AT&T. The nature of a lot of economics is towards consolidation, and we have network effects, and it makes it difficult for new folks to enter the scene in different kinds of mature economies. But I really believe in the open web. I believe that it really honestly shouldn't be controlled by a single, not only company, but also by government. And when we get to some of these China articles, we can talk a little bit about some of that. So I hope Firefox lives on.
And as do I, right? I'm the same as you, Wes. I keep it in my installed on my desktop. In fact, I even install the Linux version when I use a Chromebook, because there are times when just opening up another browser is a really, really big deal. One thing that is really interesting to me, though, and I don't know if this is my influence or what the deal is, that I've noticed that the older folks in my life, and I'm talking specifically of my mom and dad and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, they're all dedicated Firefox users. And that's so weird to me, because I guess I would have assumed, I don't know how common that is, but I keep telling them that you'd be better off in Chrome, and they always just use Firefox. And in fact, when they get, new Windows laptops, it's not that they're using Internet Explorer, right? And maybe it's because, Internet Explorer was just that terrible, right? But the bottom line is they're always like, well, I want Firefox on here. And I'm like, how do you even know what Firefox is? Because they're not that tech savvy as a crew, and yet you can pry away from Firefox from their cold dead hands. So interesting.
Well, one other thought I have related to this is that, the Mozilla Foundation, which is the organization that is promoting Firefox in development, and, I'm receiving the money that Google is giving for advertising. I mean, they were doing some really interesting web projects, and Alan Levine, who is Cogdog on Twitter and is just an amazing creative soul and educator, I think is probably the person via his blog and Twitter that made me aware of some of those kinds of projects. And my perception is that those got discontinued, and I don't know that they're continuing to do that kind of advocacy. So if anybody is aware of, and I could Google this too, what's going on with the Mozilla Foundation in terms of their software projects and stuff like that, I'm not sure. But yeah, I agree with you, Jason. I know a number of older folks that really do love Firefox, and it's one of those things that I use the term baby duck syndrome. That is really a thing in Wikipedia. You can look it up. I think that they've been imprinted with that particular browser. They're familiar with it. And, if people are invested in old school bookmarks that are syncing, in a particular browser, I mean, yes, you can go import those right over. But anyway, people don't a lot of times, especially as they get older, want to have that kind of a change. So perhaps that'll be a generational thing. I wonder if young people at all have any kind of browser loyalty. I would tend, in fact, that's an interesting question. I don't know where my kids are with their browsers. I'll have to find out. So I would just assume that they're into Chrome, but maybe not.
Yeah, although it's funny you should mention that, because I do help run a help desk to serve the thousands of students that we serve every year, and I do a little less of this than I used to because of my changing role in the organization. But I would say it probably is 80-20. Chrome, and once in a while when we suggest Firefox as an alternative, it's not quite pushback. It's just that, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? Why would I install that? And then I will say that a more serious number of Mac users than I would have guessed use Safari. And I know how popular that is as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, why don't we talk a couple China articles here? This one just blew my mind, but it probably shouldn't come as a complete shock, and I think it points to some bigger issues. So this is an article that has to do with the programming language Scratch. This is from TechCrunch on September 7th, China bans Scratch, MIT's programming language for kids. And it reports that now there have been over 60 million children around the world using Scratch. And here on August 20th, a Scratch user flagged the ban, and the website was 100% blocked, I guess, by August 20th. So about 5%, between 5 and 6%, or 3 million of Scratch's registered users have been based in China. There are a lot of obviously other programming projects and ways that students can learn coding. But the article that reported on this from, I'm trying to see where that original, it was at, okay, so this is a China-based news article, was saying that projects on Scratch contain a great deal of, quote, humiliating, fake, and libelous content about China, including, and you can see this is a capital sin, placing Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan in a drop-down list of countries. So this was from a state-run Chinese news outlet, and that it also talked about any service distributing information in China must comply with local regulations. Basically, this is just so fascinating as far as the global internet. It goes further because there are Scratch projects that folks do about Hong Kong protests, and I'm cognizant now as I say these things that my words are being transcribed into Facebook and maybe elsewhere. But anyway, yes, we'll still say the words Hong Kong and protest. Hopefully I'll get to travel back there someday, even though I'm saying this. But China is, and has for years, but is arguably doing this even more so, trying to get a real thumb on the sharing of information. And Scratch is a very empowering community. There are ways that you can flag, inappropriate projects, but, the MIT curators, to my knowledge, are not considering a project about democracy in Hong Kong, as being inappropriate, but Chinese censors certainly are. So that is really, really a huge, huge thing. And a segue I'll make to another article that I also put under the China headline. I mean, I'll do two of them, then throw it to you, Dr. Neiffer. This is Ars Technica. China plans new data policy in response to Trump's admins bullying, and this has to do with TikTok. And we've been talking about 5G, and we've talked on the show about the banning of different Russian security software like Kaspersky, and then the concern over China. I think we had an article last week about stopping a fiber cable that was going to be going into Hong Kong. And spy agencies are concerned that other spy agencies in other countries are going to be opening mail and getting information and being able to have access to it. And so we see this conflict between the United States and China not only happening in the telecommunications world with Huawei, personal phones and gear being banned here in the United States, but also now it's really West versus China, or the United States versus China, trying to bring along more countries like the United Kingdom and other traditional allies to say, we want you all to make a rule that you will not put in Chinese infrastructure. And so the concern I have, is, and maybe this is just the course of history here, is that we're going to be having fracturing of the internet, different, internets that people are going to have access to. And that really strikes at the heart of one of the best things about the internet, which is that it's global in nature. And so the last article I put into this series is actually a podcast I listened to, and this podcast is rebranding. It used to be the War College podcast. They're rebranding as Angry Planet, but it's been a very, very good podcast to listen to. Political commentary, especially as it regards not just kinetic warfare, but information warfare, and the ways in which cyber is a huge, huge element of conflict between countries, to include China and the United States. And so this podcast is an interview, actually with an official of the government. And so of the U.S. government. And he's got a book called The Return of the Great Power Rivalry, Democracy versus Autocracy from the Ancient World to the U.S. and China. His name is Matthew Kroenig. But he made the point, and I listened to this tonight, and again, this needs to go through a political filter, so I'm cognizant of that. But this official's perspective is that we're really at an inflection point with the relations between China and the United States. And maybe this is oversimplifying things a little bit, but it kind of resonated with me. His point was, we have sort of assumed that, governments are going, as they embrace capitalism and free markets, are going to follow the United States in terms of democracy and rights, and, that they're just going to sort of follow that Francis Fukuyama liberal democracy, dream. And what we've seen is that China's not doing that. And, they are in the midst of, depending upon how you define terms, neither of these are good terms, ethnic cleansing for the weaker Muslim minority in Western China, or cultural genocide and outright genocide. And so anyway, I think that a lot of people have really believed, with the end of the Cold War, this time of collaboration, this time of, the internet and bringing us all together, that this kind of superpower conflict is a thing of the past. And what this podcast suggests, and what a lot of these articles suggest, is we're continuing to see this conflict not only in the economic sphere in terms of trade, but we're seeing it in the telecommunications arenas. And as we see these kinds of infrastructure build outs happening, and nations literally saying, we are not going to allow you to sell your devices, and we're not going to let our friends buy your devices for our internet. This has a lot of big implications. So the last little segue back to the Scratch article is, can China innovate equally to the United States when you don't have access to Google Scholar, which evidently you don't in China, when you are very limited in your access to information and ideas? To what degree are you going to be able to innovate, and will the West's openness, ultimately triumph, or, is China going to be able to take the kinds of innovations that they want and then use those for their very state-controlled authoritarian system? So that's a ton of ideas to chuck at you. Has your thinking about China and the United States been influenced much in the past few months as we've looked at these kinds of articles, Jason? And do you feel like we're at an inflection point? There's a good debater political question in terms of Chinese-U.S. policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of this is that I guess the promise of the internet in general was kind of a democratization of Earth, right? Like, if everyone had free ability to communicate, if everyone had free access to information, it would have a stunning result. And to be clear, it has had a stunning result. Some of it positive, some of it not so. But in a case where we're trying to create a separate internet, and this is not the only place where this is happening. There's separate internet in many of the more authoritarian countries in the Middle East. There's an attempt at a separate internet in Russia. There's an attempt at a separate internet in China. There is a separate internet in North Korea that's not particularly accessible in the country, but also outside the country as well. That all has implications in diminishing the power of kind of a democratization that the internet can bring. But I guess part of this is that the hopeful person in me says that if we can all connect with one another, that does provide opportunities to change each other's minds and to grow. And I guess the idealist in me is just sad by that notion. There might be inside and outside from that prospect. Now, that said, like, I did think it was reactionary when the Trump administration made rules against Chinese-owned firms working on things like 5G rollout, right? But then when other countries like Great Britain, also took suit, they tend to be much less reactionary in the way they approach things. I think there's probably something there, right? That there could be a legitimate fear in regards to the ability of something other than commerce or capitalism taking place here, and that is indeed scary. But the other thing that it also highlights is that who else is going to make that stuff, right? I mean, part of the problem with kind of deglobalizing based on these geopolitical pieces as opposed to the markets that are driving them is that the only way, in my mind, that it makes sense that we make those strong decisions that really minimize Chinese ability to do things like provide us hardware, we have to have the ability in the United States to make that ourselves. And to be honest, jobs didn't get sucked out of the United States because that was natural. It happened because companies make choices to do so, right? To go and take their business overseas. Famously, Steve Jobs, I think it was with President Obama, had a conversation before he passed away, trying to talk about, what can we do to bring some of these American jobs back? And he famously said those jobs are gone. There's no way you're getting those back. And I do think Tim Cook, and in fact, I think it was under Tim Cook's leadership that they started making the trash can Mac Pro in Texas. That didn't last, right?
A big seller.
Yeah, they sold 8 of those, and that certainly proves that it's difficult to bring that manufacturing back. But I mean, it strikes so. I mean, these conversations have so many far-reaching effects on the world that it kind of boggles the mind. If the 15th come and goes and TikTok is banned in the United States, that seems like just really a terrible thing. And not for me. I don't really use TikTok, but a lot of folks do here.
So I need to make a correction. Matthew Kroenig was former Department of Defense. He's not a current official. He's a professor at Georgetown and author and many other things on his resume. One of the things that he says in terms of the debates, which we can watch here in upcoming weeks, is how Biden versus Trump talk about China. And he is really, he's making this point. And I don't know that I had heard this articulated so clearly, that we are at a turning point in our relations. And it occurs to me that, this has to do with the story that we tell ourselves about another country, about foreign relations, and, the ways in which we perceive that country. And so it will be interesting to see how the candidates do talk about China. I heard I read a real troubling article this week about a woman born in China who, with her mother, immigrated here, and she's a journalist for the New Yorker. It's a fantastic article. But, the cost of people saying things like the China virus and bringing racism into the coronavirus, boy, that has a huge toll. And so, I certainly want to see our nations collaborate and want to see us grapple with these issues that we have. We were talking before the show. I mean, the fires that we have, the hurricanes that we have, the global pandemic that we have, all of these different issues, right? We've got really serious global issues as well as local issues that face us. And we need to be collaborating around those things and trying to work to solve them. So, the idea of a new Cold War is not something that I, think sounds great, but authoritarianism is on the rise, and we've seen the ways in which social media can be weaponized and disinformation utilized. And so it's going to be interesting to see, that's just not a great word, but I'm using it in lieu of better alternatives. What happens in November with our election here in the United States, and then where these kinds of things go, because the world that, and this fits into what we talk about in school and education, the world that we're moving into has been, and I think was going to continue to be, more highly connected than ever. But the competition that we have and the lines where, we're drawing, friends, and you said like sort of inside and outside, the China of today is not the China that you necessarily studied in school, if that was 30 or 40 years ago, depending on how old you are. And these things, we hear these headlines, but connecting the dots in terms of what it means and where we're going as a nation, it's gonna It's really big, right? And what I'll say is this: I think that we need to continue back to scratch. We need to continue to focus on our strengths, and one of the most important strengths that we bring to cultural conversations is the ways in which we support in the West and the United States an open exchange of ideas, innovation that allows us to be creative and build on the ideas of others. And the Scratch community specifically, I'm getting to use Scratch with my 5th grade Spanish kids this year, and I haven't started units that I'll do with my computer students with it as well. But it is so wonderful to see that kind of collaboration and that kind of dynamism. And there are some big differences between the approaches that we have, not only politically between our nations, but the ways that manifests itself in the classroom and in school. So I would say for teachers out there, share with your kids, hey guys, Scratch has been blocked in China. And my kids were like, what? Why is that? When we talked about it, I don't know for sure, but here's the ideas of why I think it might be. And those are foreign concepts to them, but saying, yeah, guys, you have an opportunity to criticize your government and talk about freedom in Hong Kong. And if you were to do that and you lived in China, you could face some really serious consequences. So those are good things to talk about. All right, sir, we've got about 10 minutes left. Do you want to hit that T-Mobile article? Because that was a pretty exciting one.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's a little mixed. So this was announced, there's been a couple announcements about this, but this is from September 4th, so last Friday. T-Mobile announces its plan to give 10 million students across the United States broadband at home. And this was part of their agreement to merge with Sprint. And actually, it wasn't even part of their agreement. It was one of the things they were pitching. The former CEO of T-Mobile talked about one of the great advantages that the United States would get out of allowing T-Mobile and Sprint to merge was that they would do innovative things like give 10 million students access to free, or low-income students across the United States access to free internet. So now, to be clear, what free internet means is it's wireless internet. So you get a mobile hotspot, right? Although I would guess that there probably also is a way they have new hardware available where you can get a kind of a little Wi-Fi antenna for your house that talks to cell towers to do home internet that way. It's very popular in Europe to do it that way. It's not nearly as popular in the United States, but apparently school administrators can go, and as part of Project 10 Million, you as a student can sign up. If you are from a low-income family, school administrators can sign up by providing zip codes. And parents can also organize this for schools. And the idea is to get out these hotspots to kids that may need them. Now, there's a couple caveats here that I think is pretty important. One of them is that it is limited to 100 gigabytes of data in a single year. And that is not very much data. It ends up being less than 10 gigabytes a month. And I'm not just talking about it's not enough data for, a couple of geeky households like the Fryer and the Neiffer James household, right? I'm talking about that for kids, right? Like if they are media savvy kids, if they're watching YouTube kids, if they're watching TikTok kids, that they're going to get through 100 gigs pretty quick. But you can pay a really cheap rate, $12 monthly, to get that to 100 gigs each month, which would be pretty reasonable for a small family that was even pretty media savvy. So Wes, any thoughts about this as a potential solution to what I consider to be an important and growing problem of equity and access?
I mean, it's smart on T-Mobile's standpoint, right? You can see in that fine print where they're looking at, folks utilizing them on an ongoing basis for their internet and their connectivity. Ultimately, I think that schools are not going to need to. We can't just wait for companies to be generous and offer these kind of things. And is that going to qualify? I mean, we're going to have to bridge these gaps in our communities, working with ISPs, getting broadband and getting multiple options for that. I mean, 5G and the promise of that is on the horizon. That's just going to be crazy fast, but I think it's a good thing. Filtering is important. I'd be interested to know, are they going to be providing some filtering options? And it's one of those things that we've just got to be, talking with students about. And because of E-rate, schools have an obligation to provide some kind of filtering. So that's going to be an issue. And I don't think that's, mentioned in the article. I'm sure that they'll have, some check boxes that they can turn on to have a level of filtering that's out there. But, there's a lot of sides to this, and the digital divide and our need to address this, and the fact that, we're in this for the long haul. The pandemic is not something that's just, here in 2020 and it's going to be gone. I think it's going to be here for a while. And the issues like we've talked about that are these big gaps in connectivity and resources and access that our schools have, we need to address. So good for T-Mobile to do this, but I don't think this is going to address the issue for everyone everywhere. And there's a lot of important work that not only school leaders need to do, but community leaders need to do, working in partnership with business to see that we address the digital divide everywhere, not just in a few places.
Great. Okay. Is there anything else we need to hit this week, Wes, before we go to the Geeks of the Week?
Yeah, let me do one that was kind of wild. I put this under media literacy, and I should have probably Googled this source because I'm sure we've all heard of the website Rest of World from August 31st. The headline is, "One Village's Response to Disinformation: Burn Internet Towers and Take Hostages." This is a story from Peru, and the subtitle here is that 8 engineers were taken hostage in a remote Peruvian village after 5G conspiracy theories combined with a long-standing mistrust of outsiders. And so this was in June of 2020, and these engineers went to this remote area in Peru. And if you have not heard, and we're actually in the midst of a conspiracy theory unit with my 6th graders right now. There's a number of, conspiracy theories out there about 5G, and there've been, pictures and shared on social media of angry people confronting, workers, putting wires up telephone poles and on towers and things like that. And so those kinds of conspiracy theories, they say, partnered with the coronavirus and the isolation that comes there and distrust of foreigners, led to this hostage situation, which was pretty crazy. But disinformation played a big role in it. And so that's why I put that under the headline of media literacy. So I do not think we're going to resolve all of those disinformation challenges by the election that we're going to be having here in a little bit. And there's different ways that this is going to manifest itself. And this is one of the weirder ones that I had heard about. So,
well, I can't top that. So I think it's time to go to Geeks of the Week. Wes, what would you like to share with us this week?
Okay, so I made a 5-minute video yesterday called "Change Your Google Password." We had one of our students with their account compromised on Friday, and we are in the process of working with our students to make sure that they all are using secure passwords. And so this is just a short little video that shows the steps of how, students can go in, and this is for anybody with a Google account, and be able to change your password. We don't require and actually even allow our kids at this point, as far as 2-step verification. We do that for all of our faculty and staff, but it's just super important that we help educate not only kids, but also their parents about passwords and the fact that we want unique passwords. And, the longer that password is, the better, but it needs to be something that is not easily guessable and that you haven't used anywhere else. And I mentioned in that video, the website Have You Been Pwned, which is a Microsoft white hat hacker maintained website of data breaches. And you can just, not a password, but just put in an email, and it shows you all the data breaches that email address has been involved in, whether or not the passwords were compromised, and whether other information has been compromised before. And that just means it's on the dark web. And if you're using that same password again, guess what? Somebody, probably has it, and they very well could be using it to try to gain access to your account. So as some of you know, if you're a longtime listener, Dr. Neiffer is the absolute model geek for changing passwords and utilizing the tools that are available. I'm not setting them up for a hack, guys. I'm really not.
I was going to say.
But Jason is the only person that I know, who has taken this seriously, and it's something that I've done some of, but I haven't completed. You can use the built-in password manager in Google Chrome. You can use, LastPass, 1Password. They call it Watchtower, different things, but it will now cross compare your passwords to these databases of compromised passwords. It'll tell you which passwords are repeated, and those are things that we all need to do. So we're working with our students, but also hoping they will talk to their parents about those things as well. What do you have for us, Dr. Neiffer, for your Geek of the Week?
Well, I thought this article was actually pretty interesting and had some interesting ideas for tools that I might I might take a look at later. But for those of you that are knee deep in whether you're supporting distance learning or you're remote teaching or you're just using a lot more tech because of the extraordinary times that we live in, Fast Company has suggestions of what to do if you are over-tabbed in your browsers. One of my favorite suggestions is to turn a website into an app, which works on Macs, PCs, and Chromebooks. I do that with a couple of apps. For example, the Emoji Dictionary that I like to go to is actually an installed web app on my computer and teaches you how to do that, whether it's meant to be a web app or not. And there were two new tools there that were kind of organization tower tools. They cost money, which I'm not really wild about because it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I get people need to have an economic model to develop, but paying $6 a month to have a plugin essentially for Chrome that changes the way you do tabs is a little weird to me, but it was an interesting enough article that I wanted to share it. So Fast Company from August 26th, stop opening so many browser tabs and use these 3 slick tools instead.
And today we did a practice remote learning with one of my 5th grade classes on their Chromebooks. And one of the things we were doing is closing out all the tabs we could. It is a, I don't know what it's a pandemic. It's a big issue that a lot of people have. And when you happen to peer over somebody's shoulder or help them with their computer and you're like, how many tabs do you have? I mean, literally I've seen teachers that have like over 50 tabs open, and it's like, do you use any kind of tab, management tool? So yes, good advice there. Tab addiction, I think. Is it in the DSM guide?
It could be, and I know a couple of folks, that absolutely are like that. So.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. We've had a few different live viewers. If you happen to still be with us live and want to type into the chat to let us know where you are, we're always interested to know and appreciate your live attendance. You can find all of the links that we did not talk about, as well as those that we did, on our website, edtechsr.com/links. But on our main EdTechSR website, that's where you will find our small audio versions of these shows, as well as video versions, and you can always subscribe to us on YouTube and on Twitter. So, Dr. Neiffer, when you are not here on Wednesday nights, where can people continue to glean your wisdom and technology tips?
I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, blog.ncce.org.
Awesome. And I am W. Fryer on Twitter. I am continuing to share my curriculum on mdtech.cassidy.org. And then for media literacy, I set up a little Google site this summer off of my main westfryer.com site, which is just medialiteracy.westfryer.com. So continuing to work on media literacy and believe that it is an important skill of the present and the future that we all need to work on. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Until next time, stay savvy, stay safe, and stay warm up there, Dr. Neiffer. I guess you may need a coat tomorrow morning.
Absolutely. Good night.